In the rush of a morning scroll, as your eyes sweep past 100 headlines, a dozen arguments, and yet another curated life, you might not notice how your breath shortens. Notifications blink like fireflies lost in the daylight. Attention splinters, emotions come uninvited. What begins as a simple update from the outside world slowly becomes an invasion, not with violence, but with repetition. The same fears, judgments, and comparisons rise again, looping silently. Unresolved emotional wounds activate the same neural pathways again and again, shaping how we perceive new situations. These are the subtle impressions left by thoughts, words, and actions. After he recovered, he avoided that well for the rest of his life, even though it was the only one in the village. Instead, he traveled hours each day to draw water from a distant spring. Most of us never notice this tone, but it determines much of our behavior. If something feels unpleasant, we reject it. If it feels pleasant, we cling to it. If it feels neutral, we ignore it. But when we become mindful of the tone without reacting, we break the cycle. The Stoics introduced the idea of prohairesis, the uniquely human capacity for conscious choice. Ask if the moment you're reacting to belongs to the present or to a memory. Observe it without judgment. Let it pass like a breeze. Acknowledge but not obeyed. This is not weakness, it is strength. As the Bhagavad Gita reminds us, the mind is both friend and enemy. Whether it liberates or enslaves depends not on the mind itself, but on how conscious we are of its patterns. This is the space between stimulus and response, the moment where freedom lives. It is to refuse its dominance over the present. That is what Seneca and the Stoics offer us. Not the denial of pain, but the power to choose a response that does not replicate it. Not just healing, but transformation. That is how the inner trail becomes a new path, and the forest of the mind opens into light. When we become aware of our reactions, we gain the ability to choose differently. That choice, repeated over time, carves new trails. It creates new grooves in the forest of the mind. We are no longer trapped by the pathways built from pain. We learn to observe discomfort without needing to escape it. That is the beginning of freedom, not the end of pain, but the end of automatic suffering. The wound had healed, but the fear had not. What began as survival became limitation. This is what happens when pain writes our map. At the site of Ka-Talyuk, one of the oldest human settlements in Anatolia, researchers uncovered walls painted in red ochre, and rooms filled with animal skulls carefully arranged around domestic spaces. These were not decorations, they were symbols, ritualistic markers possibly intended to protect, to remember, or to control unseen forces. The repetition of these objects suggests a cultural memory, a collective response to past events. Entire communities, it seems, have mirrored the patterns of ancient wounds, building their spaces as expressions of what once threatened them. We change our behavior to protect ourselves, but in doing so, we often imprison ourselves in old definitions. The daughter of a critical parent may grow up seeking perfection in everything she does. The son of an absent father may struggle with presence and connection, not because he chooses to, but because he never learned otherwise. This is not fate, it is inheritance, not of DNA, but of emotional architecture. The Stoics believed that we are not bound by what we receive. Seneca said that no man is free who is a slave to his passions. Passions, in this context, include the unconscious beliefs and reactions that we mistake for our identity. Like seeds planted deep in the soil of the mind, samskars grow into tendencies, preferences, fears, and cravings. They determine how we respond before we even know we are responding. These impressions, if left unexamined, become the architecture of our suffering. They don't scream, they whisper. They suggest that we stay away from something, distrust someone, lash out, or retreat. And often, we obey, The Stoics, however, recognized this long before the science. Epictetus taught that it's not events that disturb us, but our interpretation of them. Yet those interpretations are rarely fresh. They are formed in the crucible of earlier experiences and carried forward as automatic reactions. The more unaware we are of this process, the more we live it as truth. The past isn't behind us, it replays in the subtlest of habits. Without realizing it, we repeat what once hurt us. Welcome to Stoic Dhamma, a space where timeless wisdom guides us back to the stillness beneath the noise. It asks us to see our inner pathways as they are, not as they pretend to be. Because fear is deceptive, it often disguises itself as wisdom. It convinces us that avoidance is protection, that anger is strength, that withdrawal is safety. But the Stoics taught that virtue lies in living with intention, not in reacting through habit. Today, we gently approach a deeply human pattern, the unconscious cycle of pain. The Stoic philosopher Seneca once wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality. If pain carves a groove in our mind, what stops us from walking the same path again and again?" Through stories, forgotten cultures, and Stoic reflection, we will explore how to notice, understand, and release what no longer serves us. This is Don't Repeat What Hurt You. Imagine walking along a narrow forest trail. The trees are tall, their branches forming a canopy that filters sunlight into long shadows. You've walked this path so many times that your feet know exactly where to land. You don't need to think, you just follow. But this trail wasn't always here. It was carved, one step at a time, through repetition. And that is precisely how many of our inner responses are formed. The habits of emotion, the instinctive reactions, the flinches and the silences, these are not random. They are grooves left behind by experience, especially by pain. Seneca observed that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. What he meant was not that suffering is imaginary, but that once pain has visited us, it lingers in memory and resurfaces long after the cause is gone. We imagine its return, we brace ourselves for it. And in doing so, we repeat it, not just mentally, but behaviorally. A comment that reminds us of an old criticism, a gesture that echoes a past rejection, a look that resembles a moment of betrayal. All of these things trigger responses we don't even choose. They simply arrive. We're not reacting to the present. We're reenacting the past. Modern psychology now has a name for this, the trauma loop. In the spiritual philosophy of the Upanishads, there is the concept of samskara. There is an old story in Indian folklore about a man who was once bitten by a snake at the edge of a well. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength, but that strength requires clarity. In Buddhist psychology, the concept of Vedana describes the tone that accompanies every sensation and thought. It can be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. There is something profound to consider from archaeology as well. On a more personal scale, families carry similar echoes. How do we change this? Not through resistance, but through awareness. The next time you find yourself responding sharply, avoiding a situation, or repeating a story about yourself, pause. To break the cycle is not to erase the past. Forgiveness, in most cultures, is spoken of as a virtue, yet it is rarely understood as a form of knowledge. In popular narratives, forgiveness is often seen as something we grant to another, an act of benevolence, a moral high ground. But to the Stoics, and to many Eastern philosophies as well, forgiveness is not merely a social gesture. It is an internal reordering. It is what happens when understanding finally replaces reaction. And most of all, it is not about the other person. It is about releasing ourselves from the repetition of pain. Two monks are walking along a path when they come across a woman who cannot cross a muddy stream. One monk lifts her and carries her across, Among the ruins, tablets were found containing rituals not only for celebration, but for cleansing emotional states: anger, grief, shame. This does not mean others are not responsible for their actions. It means we are responsible for what we carry. Forgiveness, from this view, is not acquiescence, it is clarity. A father's silence becomes a son's fear. A mother's criticism becomes a daughter's perfectionism. What was not healed is handed down. The Stoics teach that we do not inherit virtue or vice. We inherit circumstances. Our task is to respond with wisdom, not repetition. Seneca advises us to treat each new moment as an opportunity for moral freedom. That means noticing when we are reacting not to the person in front of us, but to a ghost from behind us. That moment of noticing is the first act of forgiveness. It is the wisdom to say, "This pain shaped me, but it does not define me." It may take the form of a journal entry, a walk at dawn, a quiet exhale after a long memory rises. As Epictetus advised, we must separate what is within our control from what is not to judge yourself, but to ask whether that memory is still serving your growth. If it is not, thank it for what it taught you. And then, when you are ready, set it down. The journey forward will be lighter. And in that lightness, something quiet and new begins. The past is not within our control, but how we carry it is. And this choice, repeated gently, becomes a kind of liberation. It is not dramatic, it is not loud, but it is real. Forgiveness is not a single act, it is a practice, a steady dismantling of the structures built by pain. And over time, it becomes the architecture of peace. The mind learns to soften. The heart learns to trust again, not because it forgets the wound, but because it is no longer ruled by it. In the Hindu tradition, the concept of viraj non-attachment reminds us that true peace comes from the ability to let go of identity built on reaction. We are not what was done to us, we are what we choose in response. These were not private reflections, they were communal acts. The society understood that unresolved emotion could not be allowed to accumulate. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. These words are often directed inward as much as outward. They acknowledge that within every conflict, there are layers of misunderstanding, suffering, and projection. Forgiveness in this sense is not about being right. It is about being whole. When we choose to forgive, not for the sake of harmony with another, but for harmony within ourselves, we close a wound that otherwise remains open. It needed recognition, ritual, and release. In modern life, we often lack such communal rituals. Forgiveness becomes internalized, isolated, almost invisible, yet it is no less powerful. A quiet moment of release can be as transformative as a sacred rite. Hours later, the other monk, still fuming, says, "Why did you carry that woman?" "We are not supposed to touch women." The first monk replies, "I set her down hours ago." "Why are you still carrying her?" Forgiveness, here, is not about a grand gesture. It is about setting down what is no longer needed. The burden is not in the event, but in the memory clutched too tightly. Seneca, whose life was shaped by betrayal and political turmoil, spoke often of mercy. "He who does wrong is more wretched than he who suffers it," he wrote. These words invite a quiet revolution. The Stoics did not encourage naivety or passivity. Rather, they taught that when someone wrongs you, their behavior is theirs. Your response is yours. To carry their actions in your heart like burning coals is to allow their mistake to become your burden. In forgiving, you do not absolve them, you simply refuse to carry them further into your future. This distinction is echoed in Hindu thought. The Bhagavad Gita, in the moment before Arjuna enters battle, teaches that action must be rooted in discernment, not in attachment to outcome. When someone has hurt us, especially in formative years, their action can become a voice inside us. A criticism becomes self-doubt, a betrayal becomes mistrust. These inner patterns are not simply emotional residues, they are mental habits that shape our behavior. To forgive, in the Stoic tradition, is to examine those habits. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. What does that mean in practice? It means not becoming reactive, bitter, cynical. It means choosing, again and again, to be free. Forgiveness, then, is not forgetting or excusing. It is choosing to act from clarity instead of emotional reflex. Krishna reminds Arjuna that peace comes not from passive withdrawal, but from aligning with one's dharma, the deeper truth that transcends circumstance. In this light, forgiveness is an act of alignment, not surrender. It is the reclaiming of personal clarity, not a favor bestowed on another. Consider for a moment the power of an old wound. There is an ancient Buddhist parable that illustrates this with simplicity. In archaeology, there are curious findings in the ancient city of Ugarit, on the Syrian coast. Epictetus wrote that we must stop blaming others for our suffering if we wish to be free. There is a practice in Hawaiian tradition known as ho'oponopono. It is a reconciliation prayer with four phrases, "I'm sorry." In families, the cycle of unforgiveness is often generational. This kind of forgiveness requires no audience. It is done in solitude, often in silence. To forgive is not to erase, it is to reframe. What once consumed us becomes context, not identity. So, if you find yourself holding onto something that hurt you, a word, a silence, a betrayal, pause. Healing does not always arrive with ceremony. More often, it begins in the quiet shift between one choice and another. It was self-mastery. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment of it. And it is in your power to wipe out that judgment now." He acts not from vengeance, but from principle. He does not allow past injuries to define his character. This is the essence of Dharma, not blind obedience to law, but alignment with the deeper truth of being. To act from Dharma is to interrupt the cycle of hurt. It is not enough to think differently, we must live differently. It is learning to speak to yourself kindly, even when your mind echoes old insults. It is making room for joy, not as denial of the past, but as affirmation of the present. It is setting boundaries, not to punish, but to protect what is sacred. And most of all, it is continuing day by day to choose the path that leads toward wholeness, even when that path is unfamiliar. We must pause before speaking a familiar criticism. We must breathe before stepping into a familiar conflict. Do you pause more often? Do you choose differently, even once in a while? Do you listen to your own voice with less fear? These are not grand transformations. They are quiet revolutions. They are the footsteps of someone who no longer needs to live inside the wound. Someone who no longer needs to repeat what hurt them. Someone who is learning, moment by moment, to walk a new trail into the light. We must learn to walk away, not in bitterness, but in clarity. And when we fail, and we must begin again without shame. Because repetition is only a prison when unconscious. When chosen with care, repetition becomes a discipline. And discipline is the soil in which healing grows. It is to say, what happened to me will not decide what I become. It is a kind of inner sovereignty. This is not a denial of feeling. It is an invitation to act not from pain, but from presence. Every time we respond with awareness instead of reflex, we lay the foundation for a different life. In Peru, the Quero people speak of any sacred reciprocity. It had been marked with a cross and divided into segments, meant to be shared. In a moment of terror, someone had baked and prepared for communion. There is something beautiful in that image. Even as disaster approached, people continued to make space for nourishment, for ritual, for healing. The lesson is quiet but enduring. In the face of loss, Humans have always chosen to restore, to reweave the threads of meaning. To heal oneself is to restore balance within the greater whole. If you forgive, you do so not only for your peace, but for your ancestors, your children, your community. In this worldview, every time we choose not to repeat the pain that shaped us, we are clearing a path for others. This is what the Stoics might have called cosmopolitanism, the idea that we are all part of a shared rational order. Your healing is never just yours. It may not feel dramatic. It may not even feel like healing, but it is. When the body no longer braces for the same attack, when the mind no longer spirals into the same defense, something has shifted. Not on the surface, but at the core. When we do that, when we no longer let old wounds dictate our behavior, we step into the realm of conscious action. You wake up and, for the first time in years, do not check your phone before opening your eyes. You walk away from an argument, not out of defeat, but because the battle no longer interests you. You choose not to respond with sarcasm, though the words were already forming. And suddenly, you have done something extraordinary. You have broken a pattern. You have acted without repeating. This is the real work of healing, and the Stoics understood it intimately. For them, healing was not emotional catharsis. The ancient Stoic term for this was prohairesis, the rational faculty of choice that distinguishes us from other beings. It is the space between stimulus and response. It is where dignity lives. In Ayurveda, the traditional medicine system of India, disease is often seen as the accumulation of imbalance, too much heat, too much cold, too much stagnation. The cure is not to eliminate the body's reactions, but to realign them with nature's rhythms. Emotional healing is similar. When our inner life is in harmony, we do not repeat what wounded us. We no longer need to. We are no longer unconsciously seeking completion through pain. Imagine being insulted, but instead of reacting, you reflect. You recognize that the insult is a sound wave, that your interpretation is optional, and that your value remains untouched. In that moment, you are no longer a product of past injury. You are an architect of your present, and that is healing, not as concept, but as daily courage. Healing, from the Eastern perspective, is not only the removal of pain, it is the restoration of balance. The Mahabharata, one of the great Hindu epics, tells of Yudhishthira, a king who chooses truth and restraint in the face of immense injustice. In modern neuroscience, this is known as neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to form new pathways. Across ancient cultures, healing was rarely isolated to the individual. In the ruins of Pompeii, archaeologists once found a loaf of bread still intact, charred in the ash of Mount Vesuvius. Epictetus reminds us, don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. This is the most demanding part of healing. Healing is not perfection. It is practice. It is the art of showing up to your own life without the armor you once needed. So, if you have wondered whether you are healing, ask yourself not how you feel, but how you act. Wisdom is not born from ease. It does not rise fully formed from comfort or convenience. It comes, more often, from sitting quietly with pain, not as a victim, but as a student. It depends on how we meet it. When we resist pain, deny it, or numb it, we often trap ourselves in repetition. But when we turn toward it, not to wallow but to observe, we find that it begins to soften. We begin to ask different questions, not why did this happen to me, but what is this showing me? In that moment, wisdom begins. He wrote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Tapas refers to inner heat, the transformative fire generated by discipline, reflection, and hardship. But alongside him were tools crafted with extraordinary care far beyond what was necessary for survival. You are no longer trying to prove something to the person who hurt you. Pain often feels like it takes something from us. Our peace, our sense of safety, our joy. But each time, we return a little clearer, a little lighter. We become less interested in proving and more interested in peace. To pause, to breathe, and to choose differently. You do not need to mirror the pain that shapes you. The wound may still exist, but the cycle can end with you. With one gentle choice at a time, you return to yourself, lighter, clearer, whole. Seneca taught that true power lies in mastering the self. And perhaps, that mastery begins when we choose not to pass on what hurt us, but to transform it into wisdom. As the Stoics remind us, what happens to us is not who we are. Who we become is shaped by how we respond. We've walked through the echoes of hurt, the grooves of memory, and the wisdom hidden within suffering. We've seen how forgiveness is not weakness, but understanding. How healing is not forgetting, but the quiet refusal to repeat. And how freedom is not escape, but presence. We begin to see others with softer eyes. We recognize that they, too, are walking with wounds, and in that recognition, compassion arises not out of obligation, but out of shared humanity. Pain taught us that we were vulnerable. Wisdom teaches us that we are also resilient. But if we turn inward, we may find that the only thing truly lost was an illusion. The illusion that life would always feel fair, that people would always understand us, that we could go untouched. And when that illusion falls away, what remains is not bitterness, but clarity. A new kind of strength, one not built on control, but on surrender. You are no longer building your life around the memory of what was taken. You are simply present, and that presence is its own kind of freedom. You may still feel the echoes. The scars may still speak. But they are no longer instructions. They are just echoes. It is to walk through the fire and not let it become your name. It is to know that what hurt you no longer holds you. That the wound has taught you not just how to survive, but how to see. And that vision, grounded in the strength of your own presence, is what it means to be truly free. Just reminders that you have come far, that you have learned, that you have not surrendered your dignity to despair. Some scholars believe he had been injured in battle, but went on to become a revered craftsman. His pain did not end his life's work, it redirected it. This is what it looks like when pain is not the conclusion, but the crossing point. When it becomes the very soil from which wisdom grows, it is not suffering for its own sake. It is suffering held with awareness until it purifies, until it reveals truth. The sages taught that through tapas, the soul becomes clear, like a mirror wiped clean. In the modern world, we are often taught to avoid discomfort. But true growth asks us to endure just long enough to understand. Not to escape, but to transform. Not to repeat, but to evolve. These words are not meant to glorify suffering, they are meant to transform it. Pain blocks the old path, but in doing so, it opens a new one. We do not have to be grateful for the hurt itself, but we can be grateful for what it showed us. That is how pain becomes wisdom. That is how the wound becomes the window. The Stoics understood this with clarity. Pain, to them, was not a curse, it was a message. This is not indifference, it is steadiness. It is the quiet confidence of one who understands that the events of life are not the source of meaning. Meaning comes from how we respond. Pain, then, is not the enemy. It is the fire in which ego is dissolved, and clarity emerges. To move from pain to wisdom is to shift from reaction to presence. It is to carry experience not as a burden, but as a lamp. It revealed the parts of us still shaped by illusion. A life heavy with unresolved pain, regret, or cruelty would tip the scale, but a heart light with truth and learning would pass freely. This image, though symbolic, offers a powerful reflection. The journey from pain to wisdom is the process of lightening the heart, not by denying what happened, but by integrating it. When we understand the lesson, the memory no longer weighs us down. It becomes part of our story, not the definition of it. It showed us where we believed we needed control, where we sought approval, where we feared loss. Through pain, we were shown where we were not yet free. Seneca once said, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." But this strengthening does not come automatically. Pain can either sharpen awareness or deepen bitterness. There is a passage in the Bhagavad Gita in which Krishna tells Arjuna that the wise see joy and sorrow, success and failure, with equal vision. In ancient Egypt, the Book of the Dead describes a ritual where the heart of the deceased is weighed against a feather. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that everything is material for wisdom. Even betrayal, even illness, even loss. In the Hindu Upanishads, the concept of tapas is central. Archaeologists once uncovered a burial site in the British Isles where the bones of a man revealed signs of repeated injury, particularly in his legs and spine. There is a quiet moment in every healing journey when you realize that the story has changed. Epictetus once said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." The journey from pain to wisdom is never linear. It circles back. It asks us to remember, to feel, to release, over and over. To become free is not to forget. It is to carry memory without its weight. In a world that moves quickly, where pain often passes unnoticed and reactions come faster than reflection, we are given a rare opportunity. You do not need to carry what once harmed you. Thank you for walking this journey with us. See you in the next meditation.